The locked room. It was a modest beach house in South Carolina, with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The host always rented out 2 of the rooms to guests, keeping the 3rd locked for her personal belongings. For her, it was a practical solution, but she never imagined a guest could turn it into a nightmare. Ramon seemed like an ordinary man. He booked the house on Airbnb for 3 days, mentioning in his messages that he would be visiting with his fiancée to enjoy the area's tranquility during his stay. Nothing unusual happened. The external cameras showed only Ramon entering and leaving, with no signs of confusion or company. However, on the final day of his stay, when he was supposed to check out in the morning, the host noticed the house lights were still on. She assumed he was running late and didn't give it much thought as she was about to drive back to the house. After a long 16-hour drive, the host finally arrived at the house around 10 at night, exhausted, carrying luggage and cumulative fatigue. She opened the main door, breathing in the familiar scent of the house's interior. She headed straight for the locked room where she kept her belongings. Without checking the other rooms, she unlocked the door and collapsed onto the bed, falling asleep almost instantly. It wasn't long before she woke up abruptly, feeling something strange. The clock beside her bed read 11:30 p.m. The house was silent, except for the occasional creaks of the wooden structure. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight to illuminate the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling that something was wrong lingered. Deciding to check the house, she got up, her fatigue replaced by inexplicable anxiety. She walked through the living room and kitchen, noting that everything was exactly as she had left it. She passed by the 2 bedrooms usually rented to guests and found the beds made, though one had its blankets slightly rumpled. This confirmed that Ramon had stayed there. Then, something caught her attention. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the hallway. Her heart raced. She followed the sound to the end of the hallway, where the door to her locked room was. It was impossible not to notice that the door was slightly ajar, something she knew she hadn't done. She whispered, "Ramon, are you still here?" No answer. A mix of fear and bravery compelled her to crouch and look under the door. The light in the room was still on, and what she saw made her blood run cold. 2 bare feet, standing almost in the center of the room. She fell back, struggling not to scream. Someone was in there, and she had no idea how it was possible. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing her phone and trying to think quickly. Her initial plan was to grab a knife from the rack, but the largest one was missing. Panicking, she fled the house and called the police. While waiting, she locked herself in her car, watching the front door. Nothing seemed to move inside. When the police arrived, they entered the house and called out for Ramon. To their surprise, he calmly came out of the room, showing no signs of the regression. He claimed he had lost track of time and needed another night, but denied taking the knife or doing anything suspicious. The officers searched the house and found the knife back in the kitchen rack, as if it had never been missing. With no evidence of a crime, the police couldn't arrest him, advising the host to report the case to Airbnb. After everyone left, the host immediately changed the door code and contacted the platform, which banned Ramon from using their service again. However, this did little to ease the terror she felt that night. The thought of him hiding in the room, possibly waiting for something worse, never left her mind. From then on, she never rented her house to strangers again, preferring to leave it empty rather than take another risk like that. The night visitor. She desperately needed a break from everything. At 26, her life felt trapped in a cycle of pressure and frustration. Her relationship was falling apart, and the atmosphere at home was suffocating. So, she decided to rent a small Airbnb in the mountains of Virginia, an isolated cabin deep in the woods, promising peace and a break from the world. The photos on the website showed a cozy cabin with large windows, letting in natural light, surrounded by dense trees and breathtaking autumn scenery. It was exactly what she needed. The host was friendly and provided detailed directions to the location. He mentioned that the area was extremely peaceful, but also emphasized that there would be no cell service, something she hadn't considered an issue at the time. She drove for nearly 3 hours to get there, feeling lighter with each mile away from home. The dirt roads leading to the cabin were winding, and as she got closer, the forest grew denser. Finally, she spotted the small structure. It looked just like the photos, charming with a welcoming aura. But there was something unsettling about the absolute solitude of the place. She found the key in the designated spot, entered, and began exploring. The interior was simple, but well maintained. A living room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a loft bedroom accessible by a wooden ladder. The large windows offered stunning views of the surrounding forest. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of wind through the trees. After settling in, she decided to walk one of the trails suggested by the host. She spent a few hours exploring and taking pictures, feeling truly at peace for the first time in a long while. On her way back to the cabin, just before dusk, she saw 2 men walking along the dirt road. They stopped and stared at her as she drove past. The encounter was uncomfortable. Their gazes were fixed, almost cold, and neither responded to her wave. She tried not to think much of it, convincing herself they were just curious locals. When she returned to the cabin, she locked the door and started preparing a meal. The sun had set, and darkness enveloped the area completely. With no outdoor lights or neighbors nearby, the forest seemed to swallow everything. While eating, she heard a faint noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel. She stopped what she was doing and listened, but the noise stopped. She convinced herself it must have been an animal, perhaps a deer. Later, while reading by the fireplace, the cabin lights flickered briefly before going out entirely. Only the firelight illuminated the room. She grabbed her phone, but as expected, there was no signal. She remembered the host's instructions about checking the electrical panel outside, but the thought of going out into the dark unsettled her. She decided to wait and see if the power returned. Then came the sound, a knocking at the living room window. It was firm, but not aggressive, as if something or someone was trying to get her attention. She froze, staring at the window, but all she saw was her own reflection against the darkness. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it outside, but saw nothing. The cabin was surrounded by trees, and the beam of light didn't reach far. The knocking came again, this time from a different window upstairs. Her heart raced. She could no longer ignore the feeling that she wasn't alone. Moving cautiously, she climbed the ladder to the bedroom, shining the flashlight everywhere. The window was closed, but the glass appeared slightly fogged, as if something warm had passed by. Then she heard movement downstairs. Someone or something was there. She rushed down, trying to make as little noise as possible. The firelight still illuminated the living room, but a tall, dark figure stood by the kitchen door. Fear paralyzed her. The figure didn't move for what felt like an eternity, then stepped forward, and she saw the glint of a knife in his hand. He spoke in a low, calm, but threatening voice. "Give me everything you have." Trembling, she handed over her backpack, which held only clothes and a laptop. He demanded money, but she had nothing except a few coins in her wallet. He told her to stay in the kitchen while he rummaged through her things. She heard the door open and close, but she stayed frozen in place. Finally, she gathered the courage to look out the window. The man had vanished into the darkness. When the police arrived, they found no signs of the intruder. The host was notified and apologized, but refused to issue a refund. She left the cabin the next morning, vowing never to return. What was supposed to be a peaceful retreat became a nightmare that would haunt her forever. The intruder in the shed. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend. 5 friends, fresh out of high school, decided to celebrate the start of a new chapter in life by renting an isolated Airbnb in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The house seemed ideal, spacious, surrounded by nature, with a rustic charm that promised adventure. However, when they arrived, they noticed a detail absent from the photos: a dilapidated old shed next to the house. The doors were crooked, and the roof looked like it was about to collapse. Initially, they laughed it off, joking that it might be the hideout of some hermit. The first night was uneventful. They cooked, played cards, and stayed up late talking in the living room. The excitement of being there left them relaxed, despite the oddness of the shed. As the clock passed midnight, Alexis, the owner of the car, suggested everyone get some sleep. She chose the pull-out couch in the living room, while the others divided themselves between the 2 bedrooms. Rob, the most playful of the group, couldn't resist making a final joke about the shed before heading to bed. "If you hear any noises, don't worry. It's probably the old man from the shed coming for firewood." Everyone laughed, but the joke didn't feel as funny once the lights were off. Shortly after 2 a.m., Alexis was awakened by a noise. It was low but distinct, like heavy footsteps on the front porch. She held her breath, listening intently. Maybe it was an animal. However, the sound was deliberate, rhythmic, as if someone were walking slowly. Her heart raced as she peeked through the window, but saw nothing beyond the darkness. She tried to ignore it and lay back down, but the noise didn't stop. This time, it was coming from the back of the house. The next morning, Alexis told the others about the noise. Rob, of course, laughed, saying she must have been dreaming. Kelly, the quietest of the group, suggested it might have been a curious animal. Everyone decided to brush it off and focus on enjoying the day. They went hiking, took photos, and spent the afternoon at a nearby lake. When they returned, the sun was setting, and the house felt different. Rob was the first to notice. "Someone messed with our fire pit," he said. The ashes had been disturbed, and a few logs were out of place. No one could explain it, but they decided it must have been the wind or an animal. The second night brought more tension. While playing a board game in the living room, they heard a loud noise outside, like something heavy falling. This time, everyone froze. Rob, trying to keep the mood light, grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. When he returned, his face was pale. "There are footprints near the shed. Too big to be an animal," he said, trying to sound calm. The atmosphere turned heavy. No one wanted to admit it, but they were all thinking the same thing. Someone was out there. Alexis suggested they lock all the doors and windows. While securing the house, Kelly pointed out something that made everyone's blood run cold. One of the shed's windows had a faint light coming from inside. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Rob decided they couldn't ignore it. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife, he and Alexis went to investigate while the others stayed inside. As they approached the shed, the smell of mold and rotting wood was overwhelming. The door was slightly ajar, creaking at the slightest touch. Rob pushed it open carefully, revealing a dark, cluttered interior. Broken chairs, old cans, and scattered clothing covered the floor. The light came from a small lamp in the corner, hooked to an improvised battery. It was clear someone had been using the shed as a hideout. Before they could explore further, a low, guttural sound came from the back of the shed. They didn't wait to find out what it was. They ran back to the house, locking the door behind them. Inside, they told the others what they had seen. Stephanie, who had been trying to stay calm, started crying. Everyone agreed they should leave in the morning, but the night was far from over. Around 3 a.m., footsteps circled the house. This time, loud and deliberate. No one dared to look out the windows. A scratching noise at the front door made Stephanie scream. Rob grabbed the knife again, and Alexis called the police, even though they knew it would take time for anyone to arrive. The noises continued for a few minutes before stopping abruptly. When the police finally arrived, just before dawn, they found nothing. The footprints around the house and shed were evident, but led nowhere. The officers suggested it could have been a homeless person or a lost hunter, but the friends weren't convinced. The fear in their eyes told a different story. They packed their things and left before the sun had fully risen. What was meant to be a celebration turned into a nightmare. To this day, none of them can explain who or what was on that property.